Good evening, everyone. Before we begin the program, I would like to request all the participants to kindly keep your microphones on mute for the entire session. Any questions you may have for the speaker can be posted in the Teams conversation box and YouTube live chat. I welcome you all to this talk on National Education Policy 2020, a socio-cultural perspective with Professor Sukhdev Thorat. This talk is brought to you by the St. Joseph's College of Commerce in Bangalore, and on behalf of our principal, Reverend Dr. Daniel Fernandez, it is my pleasure to welcome each one of you. We've received an overwhelming response of over 900 registrations of participants who will be joining us through Teams meeting and YouTube live stream. St. Joseph's College of Commerce, affiliated to Bangalore Central University, offers postgraduate and undergraduate programs in commerce and management. It has been consistently ranked as one of the top colleges for commerce studies and continues to enjoy the privilege of being the only college in Karnataka appearing in the top 100 colleges in the NIRF rankings. The institution is governed by the Jesuits, a worldwide Catholic religious order who also run other premier institutions in India and all over the world. As it is a tradition in our institution to begin every event by invoking God's strength, I would like to request you to take a moment as we pray today. Let us all calm ourselves and in the presence of the Lord, our most gracious and loving God. We submit each mind and heart to you. May they be receptive to this session. We seek your blessings, especially for our speaker today. Grant that the insights shared by him result in fruitful reflections. In your name, we pray. We have with us Professor Sukhdev Thorat as the resource person for today's talk. The moderator for this session will be Professor Rajaram, the head of the Department of English at St. Joseph's College of Commerce. I request Rajaram sir to introduce the speaker to us.
It's my pleasure and privilege to introduce Professor Sukhdev Thorat on this occasion. His resume is awe-inspiring. It's a combination of profound scholarship, deep empathy, and vast educational experience. I'm just focusing on few highlights of this distinguished career. He is Professor Emeritus Jawaharlal Nehru University since August 2014, Distinguished Professor Savitribai Phule University, Maharashtra, K.R. Narayanan Chair of Human Rights and Social Justice, Mahatma Gandhi University, Kerala, Managing Trustee of Indian Institute of Dalit Studies, New Delhi, former Chairman, University Grants Commission and Indian Council of Social Research, teaching and research experience of more than 40 years, and from May 1980 onwards, Professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, and visiting faculty at Iowa State University. More importantly, 12 universities from India, one from abroad, have awarded honorary degrees in education. Doctor of Philosophy from Farm Size Resources Use Pattern and Productive Level. A comparative study of dry and irrigated agriculture in Maharashtra, India, Jawaharlal Nehru University, from Jawaharlal Nehru University of New Delhi, India, Diploma in Advanced Course in National Economic Planning, Master of Philosophy in Economics, and it goes on. Let me focus now on the awards. Padma Shri Award by Government of India on January 26, 2008. Dr. Ambedkar National Award for Social Understanding and Upliftment of Weaker Sections. Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar Ratna Award for 2012-13 by Government of National Capital Territory, NCT of Delhi. Mother Teresa International Award for Outstanding Achievements. And again, This is an ongoing list. Books of tremendous importance and emancipatory potential. Just to name a few: Dalits in India, Search for a Common Destiny; Social Science Research in India, Status, Issues and Policy by Oxford, 2017; B.R. Ambedkar, Social Exclusion and Inclusive Policies, Perspectives on Social Exclusion and Inclusive Policy, Oxford, 2008. Such a illustrious career, and we are truly privileged to have this laser mind and empathetic heart focus on this vitally important document of national education policy. I'm sure we are in for a treat. It's imagine the privilege of Hamlet being taught by Shakespeare. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us.
The higher education policy, as per uh, the framer of the policy, the higher education as the policy, as a matter of fact, talk about complete revamping of higher education and school education also, but I'll confine to myself to the higher education. And that is very clear from the changes that they have proposed in the higher education system. If I mention, if want to sort of within 15 days or so, 15 year or so, it want to eliminate or reduce the affiliating system, university affiliating system to the minimum, want to replace the unitary system by a unitary system. So they are visualizing of large multidiscipline universities. They are also talking about the cluster universities and increasingly creating a degree awarding colleges. So this is a model which you find generally in UK and USA. Then they talk about revamping of the curriculum, bringing pedagogy, new pedagogy, assessment of student, merit-based appointment, and also for the research they are talking about National Research Foundation, setting up of National Research Foundation based on the American system. But above all, they are replacing the existing governance, regulatory governance at the center. The by bringing the changes in the University Grant Commission and many other organizations. And of course, there are other changes. Therefore, you could see that the government through this announcement is really going for a very, very significant change in the higher education system. Now, as you are aware, the last policy was framed by the Parliament, the Government of India, was in 1986, and about 6 years later, a program of action was prepared in 1992, and that is our last statement, official statement on the higher education, which is approved by, of course, the Parliament. Earlier to that, there was a policy in 1968. Now, what is the difference between that policy and this policy, the new policy? I just want to make a couple of the preliminary points before I come to the social aspect of the this policy, the aspect that you have asked me to dwell upon. If you look at the earlier policies, these earlier policies are based on a very extensive study of the higher education system. As soon as we got the independence in 1948, the Radhakrishna Commission on Higher Education was set up. It laid down the policy. It also resulted into setting up of University Grant Commission, and the policy was developed, and that policy remained from 1948 to 1968. And but in between, before 68, the Kothari Commission was set up. After 17 years, the government thought that we should study the school education and higher education system again comprehensively. Therefore, Kothari Commission was set up. Now, therefore, in brief, I want to tell you that 68 policy and 1986 policy and the program of action of 1992 is based on the comprehensive detailed analysis of the school education and higher education system. Radhakrishna Commission report is run into several pages, and the Kothari Commission report run into 2 volumes. First volume is higher education, second volume is school. But they collected the data in greater detail and produce the report, and below each chapter you will find there are recommendations based on the examination of the system. There were 17 members, 7 of them were from the foreign countries. There were 27 subgroup related to various aspects of the higher education. They consulted about 9,000 expert. Then the 21 subgroup, about 250 researcher and expert were associated. And then, of course, they got about 2,500 memorandum. And therefore, each of the chapter of Kothari Commission report begins with the study of the system, of the issue, and then make recommendation on the basis of that. Now, if you compare Kothari, and that is how then 68 policy was made, and 86 policy was made, and 92 program of action was made. Now, if you take this Kothari Commission report and the current policy, there is a significant difference between the two. That we do not have a commission to study the higher education system since 1966. Kothari Commission was the last commission. And now it is 53 years. Higher education has gone into drastic changes, both in terms of the structure of the higher education. And just name a few. That is, the privatization is one of the new elements which has come into the higher education system. We have now state private universities, state deemed universities. We have independent degree awarding colleges, which are some of them are private, and there are many other areas about which we have a much better, we don't have an idea. Now, this committee, my general view is that this is not based on the detailed examination of the system. The former cabinet secretary Subramaniam was one-man committee along with 1 or 2 members. He is a bureaucrat, was appointed to prepare the policy. He worked from National University of Educational Planning and Administration in Delhi, and his report is largely based on the secondary literature, whatever data and earlier literature was available about our system. Then the feedback that they got from Gram Panchayat, they say, and from NGO and from many other places. But there is no study of the system, higher education system, unlike the Kothari Commission. So therefore, this report is largely based on the literature that is available around that, and then the feedback that they got, whatever feedback that they got. This was the first report, 2016 report, which was submitted by Subramaniam. Then it remained there for 3 years because people thought that the ministry thought probably that it need to be updated or improved or whatever. So therefore they formed, and then no academician was associated with that. Therefore they form another committee with Kasturi Ranjan as the chairman. So the committee, it get a creditability, Kasturi Ranjan being a very eminent scientist. So that is the problem. One of the problem of this report is that it is not based on the thorough study of the system, which we have not looked into for last 54 years, that is 66. Therefore, if you look at the sources of this report, my hunch is, I get a feeling that it is partly based upon, a lot of things are drawn from the Kothari Commission report, which is a 50-year-old the report. Then part of it is around current literature, and I think some of the major things from the US system. This was facilitated by one member from the Princeton University. That is the basis of, in my view, and such a comprehensive change in the higher education policy is proposed without having a very clear and insight about the existing system. with respect to affiliating character, with respect to syllabus, with respect to pedagogy, with respect to several other things. But anyway, whatever is the basis, that is the first point that I would like to register with you. But with whatever knowledge they had, because in fact the Kasturi Ranjan confessed in the introduction that he said, when I saw the report and when I talked to the member, he said that immediately I realized that there is a need for out-of-box solution to the problem. And he said that there were very insightful people, members, so I had to also take a note of their wisdom. I think he's talking of out-of-box policy simply because there was not much in the box by way of study of the system. But whatever method they have followed, whatever knowledge that they have depended, which I share with you, what is their approach? What approach they follow? It's a very long report. First report is about 500, close to 500 pages, and then we have this report is relatively small, about 60 pages. The summary. To cut the discussion short and come to the main point, I think what the committee begin with the concept of defining the universities. It defined the universities, and then after defining the university, then it makes several suggestions to realize that concept of university as well as the colleges. Now, what is the concept of the university that they are talking about? I think they have. It seems to me that they have taken from the Ishpal committee, which really define universities. They have also taken from the Western world. The major element of the university that they define is that the university should be large. It should house the teaching for undergraduate, postgraduate, and PhD program. So the number should be large. Number one, they have mentioned that our university should have minimum size of 3,000 students, undergraduate, postgraduate, and all. So this is and multiple subjects, multiple departments, several departments. Now you can see that this is exactly the idea of the university that is put into practice in United States and in some of the European countries, where undergraduate program and postgraduate program is together. So that is the concept of university that they have. And therefore, then they suggest certain solution that how do we march ahead and create bigger university. So they propose that in all the state, all the district places, they propose a one central university, model central university will be set up. And then they say that the affiliating system is bad that we have today. Therefore, they are saying that several steps. First step is that you form the colleges, you form the cluster university, bringing the colleges together, so reducing the size of the each institutions. Then they are suggesting still there are remaining colleges. We will try to see that they have a degree awarding right, the pattern that it is followed in US and UK. And eventually they say that the affiliating system will move towards toward the unitary system that we have. We already have some of the unitary institutions. All central universities are unitary universities. Some of them have undergraduate, some of them they do not have, but mainly MA and PhD. We have IITs and IIM, which are institutions, degree awarding institutions. So some of them, one sector is of course unitary, but the major state university sector is still an affiliating system. They do not point it out what is wrong with the affiliating system. We do not see any reason why they are asking us to dismantle the affiliating state university affiliating system and move towards the unitary system. The affiliating system is also multidisciplinary system. All the universities have several departments, and now there is a move also towards the cross discipline subjects and curriculum. But we don't find the reason. My feeling is that they should have studied the affiliating system, and they should have then proposed, given the justification for replacing the affiliating system by the unitary system. Because we already have our model of handling the problem of affiliating system. You may be knowing that because of the larger size of these universities, we have carve out university from within the university. Let's take Bangalore. Bangalore University has a large number of affiliated colleges. There was a huge burden on the Bangalore University. They formed 3 universities. And same is the case in Maharashtra, same is the case in most of the states. So we are dealing with the problem of our affiliating universities in our own way. But there is an advantage of affiliating system, that is being a decentralized system where the colleges are in a large village, small town, medium town, large town, metropolitan town. It became easily accessible to the student, particularly the poor and those coming from the uh, economically weaker background. So we should have recognize the advantage of affiliation system, recognize the defect and improve upon, rather than suggest the unitary system altogether, just drawing the model from the USA. That is the first point that I want to make. Then they suggested the concept of the university is the multiple subjects. Arts and science should be combined, uh, multidisciplinary course structure, syllabus, where the art and liberal student will also take science subject. We have tried that. I do not know to what extent it has been successful or what is being done today, but they have not studied, so they are just making a suggestion. We have IITs where there are social science department. I mean, some of the IITs have the best of the department in economics department. There are PhDs. So, but they have not studied that how many universities have what kind of courses and what is the combination of science, arts, and other subjects. So, therefore, they are making just the suggestion drawing from the American system, where there is a multidisciplinary courses. This is one aspect. Now the major recommendation comes is the changing of the syllabus. Now I will not touch upon the changes in the regulatory system and other thing. I'll only focus on the social aspect that you expect me to focus on. Now the major recommendation in this reform policy is change in the curriculum. Now, why do they want change in the curriculum? We do not know. Again, because they have not studied the curriculum. But in the curriculum, there are 3 aspects that we must remember, which have a social implication and social dimension. One is that they want, as I suggested, the 3 aspects. One is that the courses should be multidisciplinary, liberal art and the languages and the social sciences should be the combine. That is the first thing that they have suggested, which we have already noted, and University Grant Commission has recognized that. In fact, when I was chairman of the University Grant Commission, I had issued letter to the university with respect to the multidisciplinary coursework and the content. So that is the first they are suggesting. I will not focus on that. That's a good suggestion to the extent we is tolerable to us. For example, I did my pre-university. I am an economist. I had economics, geography, and sociology, but I was also required to do course in geology, and it was very tough for me. So we should have multiple courses from science and arts to the extent they can be managed depending on the background of the student. The second suggestion is, which is equally important, which has been suggested earlier also, is the vocationalization of the education, higher education. That this is also is the old suggestion that there is the student should learn some hand-on experience, and they should get some kind of a diploma by the time they get their bachelor degree. So they get a bachelor degree, but also they get 1-year diploma in vocational courses, so their employability improve. I remember that University Grant Commission had a scheme. I don't know whether it continue now, that we give the funding to start the vocational courses along with the regular courses, and some students take those courses, maybe computer, maybe electrical, another thing. So they pass out with a undergraduate degree as well as in a diploma. So that we tried earlier. Now the policy sort of overemphasize it or more emphasize it, that there should be mainstreaming of the vocational courses with the undergraduate and also school, more emphatically from the 12th, 11th, and 12th class. So vocationalization of the courses. That's fine. That's one of the suggestions which has been also made earlier by Kothari Commission and all that. The third point is the value education, on which I would like to spend more time, because that is what you expect me to speak. The value education is one of the major suggestions, and the report has spent a considerable amount of time on justifying and also indicating the content of value education. Now, what is value education as per the committee? The value education as per the committee, again, my feeling, I have seen that they have drawn from Radhakrishna Commission and they have drawn from the Kothari Commission report, but they have added the additional things which are a lot more disturbing. Now, the value education, they suggested that that the purpose of the higher education obviously is to give knowledge to the student, give skill, hand-on knowledge, so that their employability will increase. But all the commission have been arguing that we should give human values to the student, the values which improve their individual. They are able to govern their individual life as well as the social life. So the Radhakrishna Commission and Kothari Commission talk about certain values. Certainly, they talk about scientific temper. They talk about righteous behavior. They talk about non-violence. They talk about other values that the students should be promoted among them. They refer to equality, they refer to liberty, they refer to fraternity. So these are some of the values: tolerance, uh, recognizing the differences and living together harmoniously. These are some of the values that this earlier committee have talked about, and they recommended the moral education. Therefore, we had these moral education courses, we had human right courses, we continue to have those courses. They also mentioned that to a certain extent, that as far as possible, we can also draw from our traditions, from the religious thoughts, and teach the students. In fact, Kothari Commission is a lot more progressive in this matter, or more. It emphasized more that there should be a independent course in promoting values, and it should be sort of made compulsory at the school level after 11th standard, and it should be made compulsory at the graduate and possibly at the postgraduate level, so that the student get the values and they turn out to be a good citizen. They respect democracy, they respect liberty, equality, fraternity, scientific temper, and other values. So this idea of value education has been there for quite some time. Now, this committee sort of has some value addition to that concept. First, this committee said that we should draw we should base our value education from our ancient culture. The word that is used is ancient culture. Now, an ancient knowledge system, ancient values, that should be taught to the student and also incorporate into the education system. For example, when they talk about traditional ancient values, they talk about service, dedication, service. They talk about non-violence. They talk about cleanliness. They talk about truth. They talk about karma, peace, sacrifice, tolerance, diversity, pluralism, righteous conduct, gender sensitivity, respect for elder, respect for all people and their inherent capabilities, helpfulness, courtesy, patience, forgiveness, apathy, compassion, patriotism, democratic outlook, integrity, responsibility, justice, liberty, and equality, and fraternity. So you can see how many values have been given. No, but quite a few of them have been picked up from the Kothari Commission report. Now, that is fine as far as this value education and these values are to be inculcated among the student. But how we should go about, there you find an additional things that has come from this commission. It appears to me that they basically are trying to indirectly trying that we should, when we say that we should draw from the ancient knowledge and ancient values, they invariably refer to the Brahmanical values, not even Hindu values. And they would have remained silent, but I think it seems to me that the cat is out of the box. And in some places, they give an indication that the traditional values will be necessarily belong to the Hindu ethos or Hindu values, and particularly the Brahmanical values. I will give you a couple of examples. For example, there is a clear mention that we should teach the student the concept of karma, and in that context, they talk about what is called nishkarma karma. Now, nishkarma karma is a theory of karma given in Gita. What is the theory of nishkarma karma? Is that you continue to work in your present life without expecting any outcome, any fruits of your effort. So this is the theory of Gita. So they don't mention Gita. The policy doesn't mention Gita, but nevertheless, the concept is drawn from the Gita. Then also there is a writer's conduct. That writer's conduct will be promoted. The values that promote writer's conduct, individual writer's conduct, right conduct, those values should be promoted. But in the bracket, they write dharma, Dharma. Now, dharma means religion, obviously, and they are not specifying, of course, that is Hindu dharma or Brahmanical dharma or Christianity or Islam or Buddhist or Jain, but we can very easily see the inclination. They are not mentioning that we will, when we draw religious value for the right conduct, they are not mentioning that we will draw it from multiple religion. We have 8 religion and we will draw from it. That they have not mentioned. Although the Kothari Commission has mentioned that we should pick up the values from all the religion, which are in conformity with the principle of constitution, values in the constitution. But here it is dharma. Now dharma is even Manusmriti is also Manav dharma. So it gives a scope even to draw something from Manusmriti. Of course, Gita is quite clear. So I think there is a reason to believe that when they talk about the ancient value, the committee, there is an indirect in between meaning that the values will be drawn largely from the Hindu religious tradition. They have mentioned it that the children will be taught the stories from the original ancient religious scriptures, and they have mentioned with Pancham Tantra, Jataka, Hitopadesh. So they are clearly mentioned. They have not mentioned it from mentioned from other religion. These are all specifically from Buddhism. Buddhism is there, but basically it is from the Hindu literature. So you can see that there is a clear evidence there. There is other thing that we can see that right from Kothari Commission report or even Radhakrishna report, they have generally mentioned with respect to school education that we should watch the good student and bright student, catch them up and promote them to the extent possible. Now here, this talented people, talented student is replaced by what is called innate qualities, inherent qualities. Now, innate quality is a concept of Gita. Varna Vyavastha, the Varna system is based on the innate quality of the persons. So you can see that link coming up there with the religion. This is what the new addition is there for a value education. Now I have gone to the Radha Commission report and I have gone to the Kothari Commission report earlier also, because when I was UGC chairman and we prepare education policy in 11th plan, because 11th plan was a plan for higher education. So I had an opportunity to read this report. They discuss in greater detail the value education, need of value education, drawing from the religion also. But they are very clear. Radha Krishna was a philosopher, a religious philosopher rather. They are very clear. They say that there are only two ways of giving the values from our religion or from our ancient culture. One is that you pick up one religion and teach the teaching of the one religion. And the other is that you take all the religion, develop a common perspective, and teach all values from all the religion. Now, both the committees are not they are not supported of teaching of one particular religion as such. In fact, Radhakrishna Commission clarifies that we should make use of the religious principle and values, but Radhakrishna Commission referred to the Constitution and they quoted Ambedkar. Twice they quoted Ambedkar, and Ambedkar brought a clear clarity on the teaching of a religious religion in the educational institution and research in the education institutions. Dr. Ambedkar made the position of the Constitution very clear. That is, that he said we have to draw a distinction between religious dogma, that one group is adhere to one religion and insist on teaching of that religion. This is something something different than undertaking the research and study of religions or comparative religions. So he said that in the university system we should allow research of different religious philosophies and compare them and all other, but we cannot allow teaching of one particular religion at the cost of rejecting the other religion. So our constitution is based on different principle. It gives a religious freedom to every religion to preach, profess, convert, write, read. That freedom is there. But one religion doesn't become the foundation of a constitution. But one religion cannot be taught in the educational system. As a research, you can have a philosophy department, religious department, and you can take research and even award degrees on religious studies and philosophy. But you cannot teach the ideology and teaching of one particular religion to the student. That is the constitutional provision that Dr. Ambedkar has clarified, which Dr. Radhakrishna in his report has clearly mentioned. The general unanimity that we get between Radhakrishna and Kothari Commission is, am I audible? Everything is going fine? Hello?
Yes, sir, we can hear
Yes,
you,
sir.
sir.
We can all hear you,
Okay,
sir.
okay.
It's going very well. Very well. Thank you.
Okay, because there are some sounds which comes in between. Okay, whenever there is a problem, just let me know.
Definitely, sir. I'll do that.
Okay. So there is a sort of an unanimity on value education or moral education in the Radhakrishna committee and Kothari committee is that, and this committee also made reference to that, and that is that we should have a moral and value education around the principle of citizenship right, principle that we laid down in Constitution, the principle that form the basis of our governance in the Constitution. So they generally argued that we should make the student aware about the citizenship right. We should make the student aware about the principle of equality, liberty, fraternity, national integrity, national unity. In fact, if you read the Radhakrishna report, which you should read in my view, that when Radhakrishna discussed the objective of education, higher education, he took equality and discussed how higher education should promote equality. He take liberty and then propose how a higher education should promote liberty. He take fraternity and then say how higher education should promote the brotherhood and fraternity and unity and national integration. So that is the messages of these two committees, that you should have a moral education which will teach the values on which our constitution is based. We should teach the citizenship rights and obligation of the citizen towards the nation and towards the country. These was their views. Now, this committee also mentioned in passing that the value education will be based on the principle in the Constitution, but in a very low tone. The basic emphasis seems to be on the ancient value and culture. That is one aspect which is a matter of great concern as far as we can see. The second channel through which I think the the ideology and teaching of a one particular religion, particularly Hinduism, is intended to be brought is the language, the very high profile introduction of the Sanskrit language in the education system. It was never that high. I have seen Radhakrishna report, I have seen Kothari Commission report. They emphasize the need of teaching Sanskrit as one of the language, Pali, Prakrit, Tamil, Telugu, another regional language. But here, the Sanskrit is given a very high profile, high status, and there are suggestions that it should be mainstream with the higher education. Now, there are a couple of areas where the Sanskrit is to be brought into the higher education system. They also emphasize that there will be Pali and Persian and Prakrit language institution which will be taught as a language. Although they are silent on Urdu. Urdu is not mentioned. Arabic is not mentioned. Only Persian and Prakrit is mentioned. But as far as the Sanskrit is concerned, there are two aspects of Sanskrit. As it is, we know there are many Sanskrit universities now. And God knows how many lakhs and lakhs of students are getting degrees and diplomas and 1 year diploma, 2 year diploma. There are deemed universities. There are universities which offered institution which offer diploma and certificate. They don't require permission from the University Grant Commission. But those who offer degree, those Sanskrit universities are also substantially number as compared to the universities compared to other religious minorities. Now, what is the suggestion is that Sanskrit language will be taught at all level. It will be taught in the school. It will be taught in the higher education. I just want to read with you so that you can get the idea of the emphasis placed by the commission. Sanskrit will be mainstream with a strong offering in school, including as one of the language option in the three language formula. They propose three language formula: Hindi, English, and regional language. But Sanskrit could be a part of this three language formula. That is, instead of English, you could have Sanskrit, or instead of Hindi, you could have Sanskrit. So now Sanskrit is getting a space in the three language formula, as well as in school, as well as in higher education, and will be taught not in isolation, but in interesting and innovative ways, and connected to the contemporary and relevant subjects such as mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, linguistics, dogmas, and yogas, and others. So what does that mean? That not only language is being taught, is proposed in the higher education system at every level, but it could be also one of the three languages. And secondly, that it will be integrated with the various disciplines which I have mentioned. So it's a mainstreaming of Sanskrit language with the social sciences courses, which also means that the knowledge in the Sanskrit will be taught and brought into the domain in a higher education system. The second aspect is that what they are saying is that we already have several Sanskrit institutions. They also want to mainstream those now. They do not want to keep the Sanskrit institution or university as a language university. As it is, it's not a language university. Along with the language, what entire literature in Sanskrit is being taught. You have to go to Lal Bahadur Shastri Sanskrit Vidyapith. There are department of ritual. There are several departments where everything is being taught. But they want to change the Sanskrit university, making it a multidisciplinary, along with the Sanskrit language, Sanskrit knowledge. The word that is used is the Sanskrit knowledge system. And that knowledge system means the literature and the manuscript of the Sanskrit literature will be taught. Let me read again for you. Sanskrit universities too will move towards becoming a large multidisciplinary institution of higher learning. Department of Sanskrit that conduct teaching and outstanding interdisciplinary research on Sanskrit and Sanskrit knowledge system will be established, strengthened across new multidisciplinary higher education system. You can get an idea now that how the Sanskrit university will be mainstream. Then their focus is on the teachers' education. Now they have, B.Ed, we have up to 2 colleges. Now they are suggesting 4 year, 4 year, I think, yes, 4 year B.Ed college. or 2-year BAS college also. But there they are making Sanskrit as a very important component of the curriculum, because teacher should know. If you can influence the teacher, that is very important. Again, I will like to read you for you. Sanskrit teacher in large number will be professionalized across the country in a mission mode, not in a ordinary mode. Mission mode through the offering of 4-year integrated multidisciplinary B.Ed, dual degree in education and Sanskrit. So Sanskrit is again combined with the education teachers. Now you can see that yeah, so you can see that the Sanskrit is being brought. Now I will end this point by adding one point, is that that the Sanskrit language will not be the only thing, but the literature in the Sanskrit language. They have used the word manuscript, religious manuscript, will be read and taught. So you can see that in addition to the language, they are talking of the Sanskrit knowledge system, which will be passed on to the student. Now, and obviously you can see that, exception apart, most of the literature of Sanskrit is in Hinduism or Brahmanical theories. Some of the literature of Buddhist is in Sanskrit, but not much. Bulk of the literature of the Buddhist religion is in Pali. So when you are teaching Sanskrit, you are also teaching the Sanskrit knowledge system of a particular religion. This is in addition to the value education which I have shared with you. So these are two channels through which I think the religious education is being proposed to be imparted in the higher education system, which need lot of discussion. Clarity needs to be brought in on that issue. Now I will take one more aspect that of social dimension, and then I will stop, and then we can go for a discussion. The committee at length talk about the equal access, equity, and social inclusion. But there are no studies whatsoever. There's a lot of literature in National Sample Survey about the enrollment rate of scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, religious minorities, and other things. But nevertheless, they emphasize that the effort will be made for improving the access. There are recommendations for the government, there are recommendations for the institutions. But some of the suggestions which are made, some of the innovative suggestions which are made, those raise little concern in higher education. You know that one of the major change in the higher education structure, which I have not shared with you, is the duration and the pattern of the degrees. You may be aware that we have a system called 10 plus 2 plus 3. Matriculation, higher secondary, and 3-year degree, 2-year master program, and then 5-year PhD. Now they have brought a significant change. First is that the 3-year degree will remain, but they have now brought 4-year bachelor degree. They also brought a 4-year bachelor degree. But most important change is that they have brought what is being suggested is the free entry and free exit at multiple times. That is, if you get admission into BA first year or BSc first year, and if you want to leave after 1 year, you are not comfortable or you want to take a job, then you can get out. You get a certificate, and that certificate tells you that you have taken 1 year. If you want to get out after 2 years, not completing graduate, you get a diploma or 2-year diploma, and you can get out. Then if you can take a bachelor with 3 year. If you want to leave after 3 year and not complete the bachelor with 4 year, you can do that. You get a bachelor degree of 3-year duration. And then if you do the full-fledged 4 year, you get a full bachelor degree. The 4th year is generally research. My hunch is that the 4th year is bought because American system for MA admission required 4 year. And it was a lot of hurdle for those who goes to America. So it is for the convenient of those section, the 4th year is bought. No justification is given why 4th year for bachelor. Kothari Commission say 3 year, but this commission say 4 year, but reason is not given. One can assume that this is being made conveniently available to those who want to go to USA to do their master program. Now this is it has one aspect which one can, apparently we seem that it is good. and in some cases it is good that, in our system, if a boy or a girl failed in the third year, then he's a graduate fail. The essential, the basic degree will be higher secondary 12th. Now in the new system, at least you have if you are failed, you get the 2-year diploma. Similarly, bachelor you get. So that advantage of multiple entry and multiple exit, and then also you can come back. If you have done 2-year bachelor program and you get a diploma, after 3-4 years you can come back. Your grade will be stored. They call it credit bank. Your grade will be stored, and you can come back and start the third year of bachelor degree. Your earlier grade and the third year grade, you will get a bachelor degree. It's look good. Even Canadian system has that. But my concern here is that the marginalized and poor section, which lacks in higher education, whose enrollment ratio is almost half of that of the higher caste, there we need an effort on our part to see to it that they go for higher education. They complete their graduate, they complete their postgraduate. And therefore we have, pre-coaching, we have remedial assistant, remedial coaching to push the student to somehow complete their higher education. My concern is that it's quite likely that this exit system at 1 year, after 1 year, 2 year, might provide an incentive to the student to get dropout for the sake of job and other things. There is other thing also. My worry is it is quite likely that in future we might let down conditions that if you want a 2-year diploma, in the first year you should have this much percentage of mark. After 2 years, if you want to have a bachelor degree, in the second year you must have this much percentage of mark. Otherwise, you take your 2-year diploma. So that worry, that give me a cause of concern that if we introduce certain conditionalities, the mobility for higher education, which is there for the poorer section, scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, may have that negative aspect. That is the concern of my concern. I think there are several other changes, but I would like to stop here because you have expected me to speak on social dimension of the education. I have shared with you the value education, and I have shared with equal access. While discussing equal access, they have not undertaken a study of the general gross enrollment ratio. We have a data. They should have estimated what is the enrollment ratio for scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, what is the gap, and how we can plan this gap to be removed by certain specific policy. There is nothing there. There are general suggestions which have been there for all the while. There is not also awareness about the lower access of the poor to the higher education. In fact, I think one of the points which I would like to mention is the privatization and commercialization of the education. That important is related to the equal access to higher education. I'll mention and then I will stop. As far as the education is concerned, who should offer that education? We have 3 channels at the moment, 3 forms of institution. One is the government, second is the private and aided, supported by the government, third is the self-financing institutions, which don't get any funding from the government. They raise their own resources through the tuition fees. Now, the committee does emphasize the role of the public education, and they said that the public education should be promoted. That's a good news if they show a commitment to the public education. But at the same time, they are also not suggesting they seems to be not very much aware about the lack of access, a lower enrollment ratio to the poorer in the self-financing institutions, where the tuition fee is high, which are mainly in the professional courses, engineering, medical, management, and many other courses. There, what they are saying is they support the present system. In fact, that is under the company's 8 articles provision. That is non-profit institution, private but non-profit. But non-profit is defined as a surplus. You may earn the surplus, and the surplus must be invested in the educational institution itself. This is the present concept to which they have agreed. They have not said anything about it. And you know that the access of the poor is much less within the given system. They have not even suggested any reform in the fees. They have not studied the system. That is why they are not aware about it. That's the problem. And then they are reflecting on they are trying to change the concept of our private aided institution. They call it a private philanthropic institution. Our private aided is a philanthropic institution. Somebody set up a trust, the minorities set up trust, societies run the institution. After 5 years, they get the funding from the government, they become state aided. Some of them do not, they remain self-financing. So the private aided is a philanthropic institution. By talking about this changing of the word, there is an underneath some thing that bothers me, a move toward privatization. Now, this issue has not been examined. When they talk about equity and inclusion, the 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 march towards the privatization of higher education has not been highlighted. Today, we have half of our state university into self-financing universities. State university, we never imagine of state university being private, but we have half now. Almost they have catch up with the state public university. Then there are 90 deemed private universities, central and the state. So the proportion of now the student going to the self financing institution is increasing at a much rapid rate, 10% per annum, I think. And this student going to the public institution is declining, and private aid is constant. So it is the self-financing sector which has been increasing. Half of our state universities are private. 65% of our colleges are self-financing. And if you look at the statistics, the access of the poor is much less to the state private universities and self-financing colleges because of the tuition fee. There seems to be no awareness whatsoever as far as this problem is concerned. Had they looked into the data, they would have got the idea. So I think, although they are talking of equality and inclusion, but they are not getting a handle on what is happening today. Therefore, there are general suggestions, beautiful suggestion, but I don't think they carry that meaning. There is another point, and I'll stop. They have also borrowed the American concept, namely the national test for admission. That there will be a national assessment for the test for all the students after higher secondary, and then that grading, that scoring can be used for admission in the universities or in the colleges, perhaps for the universities. At the moment, the university gives admission. They have their own criteria for admission. Colleges have their own criteria, but now they are trying to bring this. Now, this might also affect the poorer section, to clear the test and to again become eligible. So that also has an implication for the inclusion. So these are some of the points that I wanted to share, friends. I think I won't speak about the regulatory authority. It will require another half an hour, because this issue was discussed when I was the chairman of the UGC. So I will stop it here and let us take question and answer. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for throwing light on the much needed variety of perspectives on the NEP. I would now like to request Professor Rajaram to moderate the question and answer session.
Speak. We have a lot of questions, but I've just grouped it in convenient chunks so that it could be addressed. Some are very practical questions and some are ideological engagements. So we will begin with the more practical ones. One question is, how does NEP affect state language status? Does it reduce the value of regional languages at the cost of a dominant language? That is one question. The second question is, are the teacher fraternity prepared to implement this kind of cross-disciplinary studies? For example, multidisciplinary training across streams is not easy. And with the existing lacunae within the system, how are you going to actually staff and recruit, and what would be the workload issues? That is one question. The third question is it Sanskrit education or Sanskritization of education? Because these two are very different directions. Because one of the questions asked here refers to how do we address the absence of other life worlds in the educational vision of the NEP. There we have Charvakas, we have Lokayatas, we have Jain, we have very many different versions of what reality is, or how we should engage with reality. But this kind of dominating one culture, as you pointed it clearly as the Vedic culture, what are its long-term implications? These are some of the questions. Can I invite Professor Thorat to respond to this in any way, in any order that he chooses?
Yeah, is my voice clear? Because your
Very
voice
clear,
was
sir.
not,
Very
your
clear.
voice was not clear. So, but let me respond the way I understood. Now,
Okay.
the language issue. As far as the language issue is concerned, the committee is fairly clear that they propose three language formula: the teaching in the regional language, and learning of Hindi and English as a language.
Okay.
So that is maybe from certain stage of school education. Then this is about the school education. For higher education also is the same thing. For school education, they say that after 5th or 8th standard, English will be started, maybe English medium. On higher education, they are clear, three language formula. But as you can see, I have read out a para about the Sanskrit. The Sanskrit could be one of the two languages, Hindi or English. They are trying to make it a voluntary, not a compulsory, but a voluntary. Now, but showing an intention to introduce Sanskrit as one of the two languages, that is Hindi and English, under three language formula, you can see that there is an attempt to bring Sanskrit in that language policy. Now, cross-disciplinary, you are very right that as far as the cross-disciplinary and multidisciplinary syllabus is concerned, it has to be taken with lot of effort and caution. That is, if we have arts and commerce and ask them to take some of the courses in sciences, or is asking science student to should take courses in the social sciences, it requires a lot of discussion. In fact, IIT student, IITs have the department in social sciences, and many student takes courses. But there is an element of voluntary aspect to it. But my feeling is that cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary courses means a very significant overhauling of the syllabus. How will you do? And that's an issue, and it will have to be done. They are not very clear. These are policy pronouncements. As far as Sanskrit is concerned, I didn't understand what you said. Could you repeat it?
Yeah, the one of the questions asks whether the orientation of the new NEP, is it Sanskrit education, emphasis on Sanskrit education, or Sanskritization of educational vision?
No, they are not talking of Sanskritization. This is M.N. Srinivasan concept. They are not talking what they are talking about. In a way, there is an underlying meaning to that. They are talking of Sanskrit language, teaching of language, but at the same time, they are talking of Sanskrit knowledge system. Whatever is written in the Sanskrit, that also will be in a way taught along with the language. That emphasis there. You can see that the Sanskrit universities will be mainstream, wherein social sciences will be brought in, full-fledged university, and the existing university will have a mainstreaming through Sanskrit. Sanskrit will become the part of the philosophy, history, sociology, economics. Now, obviously, you are bringing the Sanskrit knowledge, and that is you are bringing a knowledge of a particular religion. So there is an element of Sanskrit knowledge. But Sanskritization was a concept developed by M.N. Srinivasan, wherein he talked about culture, Sanskrit values, norms, culture, custom, which he says that the OBC, other backward caste, and other castes imitate. while the Brahmin imitate the Western culture. So he's talk of Westernization, Sanskritization. So there will be an element of course, culture, talking of culture, discussion of culture there. But there is no explicit mention of Sanskritization, although indirectly it will happen.
Okay, so there is one other question here regarding, the connection between education and profession and vocation. See, if you give this kind of orientation to ancient knowledge and ancient knowledge systems, what kind of supporting infrastructure in terms of jobs will people get who have specialized in ancient knowledge systems in the present day postmodern situation?
No, they are not talking of an independent degree. They are talking of, when they are talking of the multidisciplinary, cross-disciplinary subject, this will be combined with the existing mainstream. In fact, there are two words there: Sanskrit knowledge system and ancient knowledge system. Now, in ancient knowledge system, the policy emphasize rightly that there will be there will be courses where you tell the student what is the scientific knowledge that we have developed in mathematics, in astronomy, and all that. That's okay as a part of the history. You can certainly teach that. Uh, but there won't be. They are not talking of independent degree. There will be a degree in Sanskrit language. That's another matter. But they are not talking of independent degree in ancient knowledge or ancient subject. So Sanskrit will be made. Sanskrit knowledge system will be made a part of the liberal art education. So it's a mainstreaming of it, which you get. So if you do 2-3 courses in your subject, you are doing 1 or 2 courses in Sanskrit knowledge system and language.
Okay. There is one question here, sir, with regard to access to education, access to higher education. With the increasing orientation towards privatization, what will happen to marginalized sections of the society which may not be able to participate economically in this kind of new vision and new orientation?
Well, you are right. This was the last point that I discussed with you. Those who are interested, can go to there is a Center for Higher Education Research or something like that, Higher Education Research Center, which is a part of the NUPA, National University of Educational Planning and Administration. NUPA, it was a institute. And they have brought out a series of volume. Varghese is the Vice Chancellor now. There's a one volume on education and equity, and I have my full article on equity and access to higher education. Now, it's very clear, that as it is, even if you take public institution and private aided, which do not charge that high a fee, and still the access of poor is low. If you take the income classes, monthly per capita consumption expenditure classes from the National Sample Survey on Higher Education, or you take income classes and work out the enrollment ratio, gross enrollment ratio, the enrollment ratio of poor is very low compared to the top income bracket. The enrollment ratio of the bottom classes is really low. Because even public education system, you require some education is not that free. You require, if you cross the middle class and go to secondary and higher secondary, you can see a clear dropout among those classes. The dropout is not there for the middle income and higher income group. So education as such is a poor bias, but it has made it more unequal by introducing the self-financing schooling system and self-financing college. Because my own state of Maharashtra, they passed what is called self-financing school system in 2003. Now the fee being very high in the school and even in the preschool system, the poor cannot afford to go there because the quality of education is somewhat better. So the access of the poor and scheduled caste and scheduled tribe is much less in the private school system, self-financing, as well as in the professional colleges. all self-financing colleges. In fact, if you take the share, for example, if you take total student in the self-financing school or total student in the self-financing colleges and universities, almost 60-70% are from the top income bracket, and very small percent, 2-3%, 4% are from the bottom income bracket. So the self-financing institution, that is private institution, has created an unequal access, particularly to the poor and even lower income group, because professional education fees are very, very high. So this is a problem which we have created. Let me tell you that even in public education system, we have created a hierarchy like caste. I was told that there are 70 type of a public education system institutions, even in public education. You have municipality school, you have a Jilla Parishad school, then you have a central school for the central employees, then you have a Navy school for Navy, then Air Force school, then you have a Sanskrit school in Delhi for which is for the IS officer, one of the best school and expensive school. But there are other, which are those I do not know. There are 70 type of school in the public education system and even the private aided. So we have created an unequal education system in public education system itself. And on the top of that, now we have brought the privatization of the higher education, which is expensive. Now, what is the meaning of this? First meaning is that the access to the poorer will be less. So they will be less educated from the better institutions. The impact will be that we are developing the human resource capability in an unequal manner. And once you enter into the market, then those who got a better education, they get a job. Those who got a ordinary education, they get a job, but maybe they get a job with a lower earning. Now, in Europe, they resisted from privatization of the school education and higher education. Even today, what do they say? That education is a human right. It's like a food and housing and cloth. Everybody should have education because education makes the man different as compared to the illiterate person. So education everybody should have, and that is possible if you have public education system where everybody can afford. That's why we brought the Right to Education Act. And therefore, in Europe, everybody get education. The quality differ depending on your individual abilities. But you are given the education. You are given what is called equal opportunity in education. Once you get a degree, you enter. You go to the market, and then depending on your qualities and merit, you can try the job. In India, what we are doing is that unlike Europe, where they gave you equal opportunity at a school and higher education, we begin with unequal opportunity in school system, in higher education. Therefore, we create people with unequal potential and employability, and that result into economic inequality. So our education system is becoming a source of economic inequality, as against unlike the Europe, which is not. So I think it's a serious problem. This is not this government and this report is not talking much about it, but this has been coming from the past. The privatization started in the early 70s in Karnataka, then it came in Maharashtra, then now it is all over the country. If half of your state private universities are state private universities, some of the deemed universities are private university, 65% of the colleges are self-financing. That is our own creation. Earlier also, it may be during the Congress period or other period, other government. But we have created an unequal education system. Kothari Commission, at the pitch of its voice, talk about common schooling, which we have never.
So we now
Consider.
come to the concluding question.
Yeah.
And this has to do with what, I mean, I did notice that you said you are not touching on the regulatory aspects of NEP, but this has been such a well-rounded presentation, touching on such subtle and with such analysis. Leaving this one aspect out makes it gives it a touch of incompleteness. There's one question here: how will the implementation of Higher Education Commission of India affect the overall picture in the light of replacing UGC, AICTE, and other existing bodies? What's the in and out of this?
Well, I think I thought that you have given me specific topics, so I thought I should confine to those issues. But now that you have time and you ask me a question, I will share my mind on this.
Thank you, sir. Thank
Yeah,
you so much.
the present system is bring a significant change in the regulatory framework of the higher education. At the moment, what we have is University Grant Commission, which is an autonomous body. The only representation of the government is that the Secretary of the Ministry of Education is a member of the governing commission of education. He is a member, and he sits and regularly and participate. And sometimes, most of the time, the secretary would send his nominee. So that is the interference with the education. UGC is a completely, in a way, autonomous body. There is a clause with the Ministry of Education that is called 20 subclause 20 number, that under in the UGC's regulation there is a provision called 20 clause of status, is that if there is a policy issue and if there are differences between UGC and the Ministry of Education, then the views of the Ministry of Education will prevail, and that Ministry of Education can write a letter under that clause, and it became obligatory on the UGC. But this is being rarely used by the ministry. The UGC has enjoyed the freedom and the autonomy, because if whatever government want to say, they will tell the UGC informally, or the principal secretary who attend the meeting, he will share there. Now, in the present setup, what has happened is that there has been a centralization of the regulation with the ministry. The Higher Education Commission is the body which will deal with the major policy issues in higher education. There will be an advisory body also, there. There will be advisors, but I think ultimate authority, the power remain with the Higher Education Council, and it is obligatory on the part of the advisory bodies. And of course, then they have created the 4 pillars, 4 block. One is the UGC. So UGC's only function will be the financing and funding, no other right. Then there will be a NAC, National Accreditation Council, which we have a NAC now in Bangalore. Their function will be only to make the assessment and accredit. Then the third will be the standard setting committee, council, and fourth will be the monitoring committee. Now these are all under the Higher Education Council. And I think although they are autonomous, obviously there will be the decision of the Higher Education Council will be obligatory. Now, earlier original draft, it was the Prime Minister who was supposed to chair the committee. So there was a lot of resistance and opposition, but now the minister will chair. Now there are several aspects to this. What is happening is that autonomy is being eroded, number one. And secondly, that a lot more things on higher education have gone to the ministry now. There are several aspects of it. Besides the fact that the power now remain with the ministry, there are other aspects. I have received some communication from Tamil Nadu and other, that some of the processes are such that it crossed the boundaries of the constitutional provision. You know, education is in concurrent list, state list, and there are 3 lists: union, concurrent, and state. Education is in the state and the central list, the concurrent list. Now, the power of the central government are limited as far as the higher education is concerned. It is only the coordination and maintenance of standard and bringing uniformity to the extent possible. This is the limited role that the central government has through the UGC. But under this regulatory framework, there is a feeling people are talking about is that there is an encroachment on the state power. And some of the state power have been brought into concurrent list, that is the central Ministry of HRD, but also they are saying that it has gone into the as if it has gone into union list. So there are legal issues. They have kept the Central Advisory Board of our education. Central Advisory Board is the body where the members are from the state. Education Minister, school and higher education are the members. And education ministries, whenever it take policy, it organize the meeting of this committee, share with them and take their approval. but the states are not represented into higher education council substantially. We had suggested when I was the chairman of UGC, a reorganization of the higher education, this thing. Now, these are the concern about the higher education reorganization, that there is a centralization now. To that extent, the autonomous character of the policy making is eroded, and that it is also likely that it has got it encroach on the right of the state. Supreme
sir.
Court. So Supreme Court has given a decision. The people from Tamil Nadu sent me an invitation memorandum. They say that somebody had gone to the court about some state about influencing the admission policy of the state. Supreme Court has given a very clear verdict that the admission is in the domain of the state. Now there is a gradual thing coming up. The new education policy says that we will have a national test, assessment test, and that the scoring of that under state by the student will be used for admission to the university. Now, admission is states is the subject of the states and the universities. Why should there should be as far as the universities are concerned? Central institution, IIM, IITs, they are under the ministry. There is a different story. So I think these are some of the aspects, but I must share with you that all that I have said is based on the policy document.
Absolutely.
And policy document is not the final document. It could be kept in completely in the cupboard, and only selected policy will be brought in, will be given the form of decision making and regulation. The policy has not gone to the parliament, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. There is a criticism that this has been announced without the approval of the parliament, because if there are so much overall changes, overwhelming changes, that has to be with the approval of the parliament has to approve. The 86 policy was approved by the parliament. So these are some of the
I'll just
thoughts.
make a small thing, sir. I said it is the last question, but in the light of everything that you have said, there's one last comment that has come up. I'll just read that, and with
Please.
your response we can close, which is, see, with all this grand vision and other things, there's a stifling of academic flexibility and increase of disparity at a fundamental level. In your experience and wisdom of being in the educational field for so long, what is the way out? How can we get out of this, I mean, in some sense, a stranglehold of grassroots democracy in the educational vision?
Now, so that is a point which I mentioned, that we should adhere to the constitutional provision.
Okay.
The education predominantly with the state, part of it with the center, that has to be adhered to. And all aspect of that, that is autonomy, accountability, financial support, assessment, accreditation, and many other things which flow out of this division between the state and the center, that need to be adhered to. And that it seems that there is an erosion of this. For example, now during COVID, some of the states are saying that we can't take examination, but the ministry is saying that no, you have to take the examination. Now this is in a way, and now the case has gone to the court. But examination and admissions are the general rights of the institution. You are a college principal, you don't get directive from UGC when to conduct exam and how to conduct exam and when to declare the result, or even you don't get directive from the state government. So there is a liberty there for the colleges also. I think there are several dimensions which are not at the moment clear, but when as the ministry go ahead and frame the regulation, take an administrative decision, a clear decision, and things will be clear. But
Thank you so much, sir.
My one general point is that I think there will be a confusion, and there will be a certain amount of disorganization also to a certain extent, because this policy is not based on the thorough study of the entire higher education system. That is to understand the various dimension, defect, limitation, strength, and then fill up the defects, gives us a certain suggestion, strengthen our merit. This is what Kothari has done. This is what Radhakrishna has done. And if this committee is changing such a overwhelming changes, it should have been based on a thorough inquiry and study.
Thank you so much, sir. Your input has opened up avenues for very enabling conversations, and I'm sure this will set a lot of debates going. Thanks a lot for
Who is speaking?
I'm Rajaram from English Department of St. Joseph's College, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Pleasure, sir.
Good
Over
evening.
to Divya.
Thank you for that engaging question and answer session, sir. Now we would like to conclude today's session by expressing our sincere thanks to Professor Sukhdev Thorat for accepting our invitation to deliver this talk. It was a profoundly insightful exposition enabling a nuanced understanding of a vitally important document, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Rajaram, for moderating this session and engaging all of us through that vibrant question and answer session. A heartfelt gratitude to our principal, Reverend Dr. Daniel Fernandez, for encouraging us to host such brilliant programs. Thank you to Dr. Nirmala Joseph, our registrar, for all the guidance and the timely interventions. Dr. Raja Jeba Singh, the vice principal of the second shift in our college, has been of integral support in the conduction of this event. Thank you, sir. Our deepest thanks to Mr. Vinay Kambipura, Mr. Thomas Matthew, and Mr. Moses Wayne for handling all the registrations and producing this live event. A very big thanks to all of you for being patient with us and making this event a successful one. Thank you all. Have a good day.